Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Trends Talk. Oh my gosh, if you are like me, you are still ramping up to the work week after a long weekend. And what better way to jump back in than to watch Trends Talk? I'm so glad you're here. We have people tuning in to the live stream as well as in the portal. And it's just fantastic. We do these every month, last Thursday of the month. So be sure to join us for the next one. We're always tackling trends. There's a lot of change that's happening right now. And it's absolutely imperative that we stay informed. And I'm excited to talk to today's guest, Christopher Williams, who's going to talk to us about AI and about STEM. And you might be thinking, well, STEM doesn't really relate to me and my job, but it absolutely does, because we're currently training that future next gen workforce. And some of the ways that we're educating are changing, and that trickles up and it changes the workforce. So we got to be ahead of the curve rather than behind it. You're in the right place to learn how to do that. And I want to mention before we start that if you like what Christopher has to say today, you've got to join us at the Next Gen Now Summit happening in October in Washington, D.C. If you want to learn more about this fantastic one-day event, go to nextgennowsummit.com. We'd love to see you there. All right, Christopher, join me on the virtual stage. Woo! All right, I would love for you to start with a brief introduction. You're known as a STEM curator. What the heck's that mean?
Man, Sarah. So thank you, first of all. I'm excited about being here and talking about STEM and the importance of it. So STEM what we do, we help educators, schools create STEM holistically. One of the initial things about STEM is sometimes it's isolated, sometimes looked upon as just, one of those programs as a club, looked upon as not in the academic environment. So it's a disconnect. What we do, we help schools undisconnect that and make it so it's part of the culture. Is part of the school's vision. And why we call ourselves, and myself personally as a STEM curator, because we curate these opportunities for every scholar to have access to hands-on STEM, that's science, technology, engineering, and math. So the goal is to make sure scholars are walking away as critical thinkers, the next innovators, and understanding what the workforce look like by having STEM as a part of their academic day, and it's not isolated.
Fantastic. Well, I'm excited to dive into this and learn a little bit more about your job and your area of expertise. So, folks, we do this in 5 rounds. I have 5 questions for Christopher, but you might have questions too. So, as we go through this, feel free to add them in the chat and I will ask Christopher. All right, here we go. Round 1. What current stat or data point best summarizes the need for prioritizing STEM? I know you know the answer, Christopher. So
Oh, man. Yeah, so great question. So when we think about STEM and we think about data and we look at it from where it's at, we could put these numbers on it. So for example, 10.4% of opportunities between now and 2033 are going to be there for jobs in the STEM industry. They're predicting over 300,000 jobs are going to be unfilled related to STEM just in this year alone. So we're talking about 80% of Gen Z. This is what they breathe. They're interested in STEM. So the data is there. Where the disconnect is that we're not exposing scholars at an earlier pace. So when we're talking about STEM, we have more scholars going out of STEM that's going into STEM. And really the case to that is because we're not introducing scholars to STEM in that early age of opportunities, grades K through 5, which is really that sweet spot to really start getting you understanding what education is really missing the piece and really not integrating is that STEM is the connection to the pathway. And when we connect that to the pathway with industry, we have a true alignment. So now scholars can start understanding those traditional or non-traditional ways of how do they think to be a part of STEM. Like if I want to be a ballistics engineer, if I'm not exposed to ballistics engineer, how do I want to be a part of that pathway? So that's where we have those disconnects and those high percentages of opportunity in the careers that there's not that data that's not being, continue to go down because we're not giving those diverse offerings. So that's why it's a big disconnect. And when we look at data, when you think about STEM jobs to non-STEM career pathways, it's one of those pathways. It doesn't require a high school diploma in every aspect. You can have a 4-year degree or a 2-year degree, or you can have a non-degree and still go into a skill. So it gives you a lot of sustainability. And that's why STEM is an exciting opportunity, because it levels the playing field of opportunity.
So now you said, correct me if I'm wrong, you said 300,000 jobs unfilled right now?
Yes,
Why
yes.
is that happening?
Well, because like I stated earlier, because the opportunities are there, but technology is evolving every day. Sarah,
Mhm.
as we speak right now, you think about it, technology is changing. So when you think about technology and we think about our workplace, you're thinking about we're trying to continue to move jobs faster and move things along. So when we're thinking about the fast pace of the technology, the pace of scholars being exposed to it, we're being exposed to traditional offerings. So computer engineering, civil engineering, electrical engineering, the jobs that are being exposed are like your AI fields, these advancements that are currently coming on, but we don't have anyone to take opportunity. Like, for example, we offer certification around drone technology. Well, who would have ever thought that drones could deliver products and food, right? So
Right.
that is a field of opportunity that's unfilled, because we don't have scholars being exposed to certification of being UAS pilots or commercial opportunities. So it's really those untapped opportunities that are not being exposed and introduced.
That is fascinating. That is a lot of jobs
It, it,
and a
it
lot of
is.
change.
It is a lot of change, a lot of jobs. So that's really why, we really pride ourselves around really connecting STEM and education. Our tagline is connecting educators to industry and connecting
Mhm.
industry to education, because if the two are married, then they have a true essence of what is needed for that career opportunity that's untapped.
Yeah, and I really feel that is the way of the future. I really feel industry and education needs to be married because it is changing so fast.
It
We
is.
need talent pipelines. We need better communication between the two entities.
That is the case. That is true. We definitely got to have pipelines. And
Yeah,
what better way to start in our grades, right? Lower
yeah,
grades is the best way to start these pipelines.
exactly. All right, let's go to Q2.
Yes.
All right, here we go. All right, how is STEM changing the workforce? We think about, we were just talking about that change is happening really, really fast. Let's get specific. What kinds of new skill sets and career paths are emerging? And I'm guessing when we think about skill sets, like technology is also changing how people learn, how they communicate. So we're seeing some new skill sets, not just jobs, emerging for the future workforce. So let's talk about that. Let's unpack that. What do you think?
Yeah, so when we talk about how STEM is changing the workforce, the first part to that, I think really we need to understand that STEM is connected to everything we do. It is connected to all career pathways. I don't care if you're in the restaurant industry versus you're in the automotive industry. STEM is connected to it in some kind of way, and that's really understanding that we need to develop critical thinkers. In every job that you're going to be in, a critical thinker or someone needs to solve a problem is a part of that equation. So if we understand that, that's where it's changing the workforce, because now we're understanding that really solutions are really the in between. And so when we think about those new things that are those new skill sets, career pathways, let's talk about AI, let's talk about robotics, let's talk about those things that are advancing. Well, those things have been around for years. If we think about it, AI has been around for years in terms of it, but it wasn't, I'll say this, it wasn't a water cooler conversation.
Mm,
It's now a water cooler conversation. And now it's being adaptive and adopted by more organizations and more businesses, that is now mainstream. And so when you think about that skill set, AI, data analytics, understanding computer science, from how to understand language, how to understand vernacular, those are the things that are really changing the workforce, because these are now prevalent components of our average everyday job. You're thinking about more people are coming out of industry retiring, but you have more technology that's going into the industry that are moving people out of those type of fields and career opportunities. But where it's a lack of, and how it's changing, because it's so fast, it's ever evolving. And, you think about it, one of the things that we just incorporated in our model is AI in curriculum development. And so when we think about the educator, the average educator is packed with so many things to do in a day. And they have to do all these things plus develop curriculum and understand the new age of scholars. Well, in order to try to still do a lot of those things manual, it's time consuming. And to be able to expedite the process, which is really why it's changing the workforce, STEM expedites the process. We call it force multiplier. It's like a force multiplier. I can add that in and I can do more jobs with less resources, but more technology. And that's the kind of the difference with things when we're talking about how it's changing the workforce.
So when you're in the, I want to ask you more specifically too. When you are in these classrooms, what do you hear people saying about how technology is kind of impacting this next generation?
Well, because the next generation is really built off technology. Where it's impacting from the classroom aspect of it, because we are really, our educators are not as I'll say they're tech savvy, but when we're talking about connecting it to a scholar who's, if you ask them how do they use a smartphone or iPhone or how to use that, they can tell you how to upload or create a video, how to create content. But if it's not connected to our academic space and the way it's delivered, then that's the disconnect. So when we're in these classrooms, our scholars are more interested in things like gamification, how to take their content and turn it into a game concept, but to make it more engaging, how to make it more hands-on. But when you leverage that, we're just meeting scholars where they're at, because they learn now with technology in their hand.
Right.
Their spark of technology is a part of their everyday cycle. And so some of the textbooks are going out of the classroom and we're coming in now where we're doing different deliverables. And so the biggest piece, I think, when we talk about it from a technology to the classroom environment, is really how to make sure that we're keeping learning exciting. We're keeping it fun, but making sure that technology is a part of that.
Yes, right. And I'm thinking of certain professions and certain, you know, uh, schooling systems and just certain things where they're just so not tech welcome, or
Well,
they're just been so slow to adapt. So their world's about to be rocked.
I said this a while back when I was in another session and I was speaking to some colleagues, and I said, look at everything around us.
Mhm.
Renewable energy, you have, electric cars, you have the automotive industry evolved, you have all our industries are evolving. But let's look at our academic space.
Yeah.
Our classrooms still look like they were in the 20th century. And I say this constantly. How are we expecting to really get that next innovator when we're educating scholars in a 20th century model and in the 21st century?
Right.
There's
Exactly.
a big disconnect. So,
Yeah.
there are schools that still are lacking smart boards as a part of the teacher technology. So when you're thinking about that engagement piece, we got to continue to keep moving that forward. And as technology changes, our infrastructure in our K-12 spaces have to change.
Oh gosh. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Let's go to the next one.
Yes.
This is fascinating.
Yes.
All right. Round three. What have you observed or learned? Started just talking about that, about today's students. What would be helpful information for the employers of today to know now about this next generation? Everyone's talking about Gen Z,
Right.
but even Gen Alpha. I mean, we got to just keep our eyes to the horizon so
Yeah.
that our companies, our industries aren't.
So you pause, but I think I got your question.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
No. So,
Speaking of technology.
I'll say this about today's students and the future student scholars. First of all, we call all our students scholars. And that's what we have to realize. Every scholar is a scholar. Every student is a scholar. And so we have to understand that, one, we can't be afraid to expose scholars to apply the knowledge based and the gift that they have based on foundational learning. One of the things I say that what we've learned and observed from scholars, when we put scholars in our STEM epic learning spaces, one of the things we do, Sarah, and we didn't really talk about it, we go into schools and create these dynamic STEM epic learning labs. And what does that look like? These spaces that are high tech, smart classrooms, have every type of resource you could think about: robotics, AI, drones, electronics, 3D virtual reality. All that's built into a classroom. So we're giving scholars this type of resource, and they have accessibility to it at an early age. And why are we doing that? Because it's about exposure. And if we expose them to the resources they're already familiar with, it's going to allow them to not think outside the box, but create that box. We want scholars to know there's no skies, there's no limits, but to understand STEM is a part of their integrated learning. And so when we think about that, and it goes back to question 1 and 2, STEM is a part of everything we do, but it's not isolated. Science, technology, engineering, and math all work together to solve problems, critical thinkers. And so when scholars understand that, educators understand that, and then our employers understand that it's all connected, it gives that aha moment to say, hey, now we need to start exposing scholars to these pathways. And one of the things that we really are excited about is that industries, if they connect their way of learning inside a classroom and make that way of learning part of the academic space, scholars are already intellectually smart. They're going to be able to gravitate to it. But what if an industry that now puts their model in the classroom and the scholars walk away with understanding how that model works? They understand that we can train them on technology, but understanding the model and the integration of it makes the marriage make sense. And so that's what we see. That's what we observe. Scholars are brilliant learners. We got to make sure we tap into that brilliancy. Everyday scholars are curious. Curiosity got to be sparked. Innovation got to be part of the platform. And we got to be not afraid to tap into the innovation of a young person.
Right. I love that. I love the lab idea. And the longer that we talk, the more I think I went to school in the dark ages because so much innovation's happening and yes, so much technology in the classroom. It's amazing.
Yeah, it is. It is,
Amazing.
Sarah. It is. And the lab piece, to go back to that, and before we go to the next round, the importance of the lab is because we have content over here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Scholars are learning all the content in a traditional academic space, but the content is not connected. When we put them in the lab, they're connecting the content to their learning. So if there's a problem going on in their local community, they're now understanding how to solve that problem in the lab. So it gives that aha moment. It connects the relationships. So we think about this, we call it the 3 R's of learning. We call it the rigor, relevance, and the relationship. But we look at the relevance and the relationship of learning to get to the rigor. If a scholar understands that this is a problem, but now understand the problem and why they're teaching me social studies, or why they're teaching me science and math, and it's connected to solving a problem, and I know now how to use a robot to solve that problem, then when I'm going to a career opportunity, I can have that dialogue with that person interviewing me. So that's the connection.
Wow. Yeah, I'm really stuck on that. This may spotlight gaps between the workers that are coming into the workforce and the workforce itself in certain employment situations. But
Yeah.
let's circle back to that because I want to get to the next question
Yes.
too.
Yes.
All right. So round 4. Speaking of this, when we think about this gap that could be really evident, we have young people coming in and they're so tech savvy. And then they're coming into work environments that are still, trying to figure out things from 10, 15 years ago, because there are some.
Yes.
What do you think is needs the most urgent attention? What are 3 steps organizations could take to really start thinking about some of these STEM methodologies or, ways of thinking or actual tools in the workplace?
I honestly, I was waiting for this particular round because,
All right.
for years we've been talking about this. We need to start looking at skills-based hiring opportunities. Scholars that can solve problems, they can show they can do the work based on skills, not so much academia.
Mm.
We're constantly looking at if a scholar scores a high score on an SAT versus a scholar can come in and solve this problem and tell you how to use this technology and how the technology can advance your career versus saying, yeah, I can actually apply my method of thought process to scoring an A on a math test. Yes,
Right.
you understand math and you understand that, but yes, can you go into this job and critically think to a challenge? And so skills based hiring is number one, first and foremost. We need to start looking at skills. We need to put that as a part of a requirement. We need to put that as a part of our assessments in our schools. That needs to be a part of it. Number two, continuous learning around technology. It needs to be a part of the opportunity where it's a part of your core growth opportunity. I'm gonna use that word, growth opportunity. How many times we heard that, right, Sarah? It's a part of the growth opportunity. AI, robotics, coding, any of those things are part of the skill set. And I'll say cross training. You should spend a day in a life with a machine learning specialist if you are on the PMP side or you on the admin side. You should spend a day in a life so you understand it, so you understand how the two connect. I think if we start cross training and putting a part of technology as part of that infrastructure, where it's not like, hey, you have your IT department, you have your programmers. You want to separate that from a model of productivity.
Yeah.
But if you don't know how the two integrates and how they dissect one another to support one another of the whole overall arching goal, because what's the arching goal of a company? To solve problems, right?
Right.
And STEM is that solving problem scenario. In some way, shape, or form, you're going to use those 4 acronyms to solve a problem. But if everyone understands that connection, it makes STEM common. It makes it a part of where it's not feared upon. When we talk about STEM, people are fearful of the acronym. They're like, STEM is demanding, it's daunting, but it's not. It's a part of the everyday.
Yeah. Yeah.
So those are my 3. I think
I like it. I like it. And you know what? If you're doing that anyway, if you're hiring for skills and you're cross learning, you're
Yes.
infusing more collaboration, greater empathy, greater sense of belonging. I mean, there's multiple benefits for the company by doing that beyond just thinking about things in terms of STEM too.
That's correct.
And again, I think that's the workforce of the future. Don't you agree?
That is, and we always talk about, Sarah, the workforce of the future, but when you think about it as the now, the now is the future.
Yeah.
That is literally, technology is, and I'm not going to say technology, I'm going to say STEM, because we're talking about STEM is a part of everyday scenarios. It's integrated into our platform right now. We're on this virtual interview, correct? It's built off technology. Millions and millions of people are able to interact with us, send questions, poll questions, have conversations, dialogue. That's a part of the workday.
Right.
Yeah. So it's common.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So I have to ask you before we go to the next round. I noticed in your bio something related to drone workforce development.
Oh,
Please tell me,
man.
what is that?
Sarah, listen, let me tell you. So when we talk about drone technology, we look at one of the fastest growing career occupations in aerospace. Drones is a force multiplier. And I get so excited about this. I'm on pins and needles, because we're one of the largest training providers around drone integration training for scholars between 16 to 18 years of age. So what we're doing is preparing the next generation of force multipliers. You can use drones in construction, real estate, agriculture, food delivery. You can use it in first responders. You can use it in marketing. It's so many avenues that you can use a product like a drone to force multiply, to give a company a leverage of opportunity, warehouse management, safety and security. And we understand that from a aspect of, yes, how do we create a pipeline of professionals? So we train scholars between 16 to 18 to use drones as a commercial opportunity. So we're getting them ready to be global certified commercial pilots. So we have this model called From Classroom to Careers, because literally at the age 16, before they walk out of high school, they have their drone certification license and they're working in a part-time opportunity.
Oh
You
my
know,
God.
let's think about and fathom that. I'm 16 years old, 16 years of age, a junior in high school with a global certification.
It's amazing.
It's amazing. So what leverage
Amazing.
does that give to that young
Mm.
person, that scholar, interviewing with someone like yourself, Sarah, that you're looking for a person that can think critically and someone that has skills-based learning? You're going to look at their resume and say, you have a 107 certification? You have a global commercial pilot? It's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fantastic. So someone wants to know, is that virtual training or in person? And how
Yes.
can people get in touch with you?
Listen,
Either.
so we've mastered the model. So it's phenomenal. So we have a asynchronous virtual model as well. So you can do it virtual or you can do it in person. We have a platform that we launched the program on. So scholars can take it self-paced or we can deliver it with the partner. But I'll tell you, and I say this to anyone that's listening, it's not going to hurt your scholar to have a 107 certification. If they
Yeah.
use it or don't use it, it's going to be a platform builder. And that's what I tell all of our partners, platform builder. How to just make sure my scholar is prepared to go into an industry and they're looked upon as someone that can be an executive level opportunity.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. All right. We have one more question and our time's almost up.
No, I'm long-winded,
We could
Sarah. I'm
talk.
sorry.
We could just keep talking. It's fascinating. Okay. What trends, because this is Trends Talk after all, what
Yes.
trends are you currently watching and advising others to prepare for, Christopher?
So I'm going to talk about my space. And I'm not going to talk, I'm in education. And I'm going to say AI in education is definitely a trend. AI across multiple spectrums, but AI in education, I talked about it earlier. What we have a product called Simple Curriculum. Simple Curriculum allows any educator from no matter what background or aspect to connect STEM to current curriculum by plug and play. So now they can create STEM opportunities in an ELA class, a social studies class, a science class, a math, any core content by that. And so why that's a prevalent? Because it takes away the comprehensive thinking of how do I connect the dots? It brings it back in. So I'll say AI in education. And then I'm going to also say shift to interdisciplinary learning. What does that mean? We need to make sure all content is connected. One of the biggest disconnects, and I'm gonna wrap it up here, is that when scholars go from class to class, what is happening, Sarah? Learning is being turned off because now I'm going to the next subject and I got to be ready for the next subject. But what if all the subjects was connected and it's about problem solving? And now I'm learning social studies while I'm learning math, I'm learning science while I'm learning ELA, and I'm getting all of that. It's going to give you more learning time, more repetition, and now you're going to be able to walk away with those scholars that can come into an industry and sit down with a professional, an executive, a C-suite professional and say, hey, I can understand problems because I was challenged throughout my whole tenure of learning because all my learning was connected. I'm not a math whiz. I'm not a science whiz. I'm a whiz at everything because it's integrated. So interdisciplinary learning.
I love it. I love it. Wow. What were you doing, audience, at age 16? And I wasn't I wasn't doing anything high tech. I was, wearing blue eyeshadow and going to the mall.
That's Sarah, the same sentiments. What were we doing at age 16?
Oh, it's amazing.
And that's why we can't think that way anymore.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Christopher,
Yes.
it has been a joy. What is your website for our audience?
Yes. So it's very simple. STEMULLC.com. STEM, STEM, the letter U, LLC.com. And the U stands for unlimited opportunities because that's what we're connecting scholars to, unlimited opportunities with STEM.
Woo-hoo. Love it. All right. Thank you, Christopher, for being here today. And thanks to all of you for tuning in to Trends Talk. And as I mentioned at the beginning, if you liked hearing from Christopher, you will definitely love going to the Next Gen Now Summit, a one-day event in Washington, D.C. You can learn more at nextgennowsummit.com. I'm Sarah Sladek, your host. Thanks for tuning in today.
Thank you.